Hello and welcome back. In my last video I mentioned that I'd volunteered to do a demonstration at my woodturners club, and in preparation for that I needed to build a few things. In my last video I built an indexing system for the lathe, and I will be using that indexing system on my demonstration. Now I also mentioned that I needed to make another part for this fluting jig. At the moment it just slides along the table like this, so all your cuts are quite flat along the side or across the face of the bowl or turning that you're doing. But I want to make a hinging platform for this router jig so it can kind of do this sort of motion, and that allows you to do sort of curved flutes. Typically they're in the face of a bowl, or might be some sort of lattice work on a platter which enhances the turned piece. Now I designed this fluting jig with that in mind, so at the back here I've made it so there's two screws at the bottom which can be easily undone with a Allen key or hex wrench. Then I can mount that onto the new swivel base. Now the demonstration is in a couple of weeks from when I started to record this video, so I need to build this part and I need to do a bit of practicing beforehand. So I think let's chit chat and let's get into it. It's always good to start with a plan, and although this is freehand and not to scale, it has all the appropriate measurements on it. For the baseboard, I'm going to use this piece of MDF. It's about 18 millimeters thick. I have this 65 by 16 millimeter piece of steel here, and I'll cut it down the center, and that'll do for the two ends. Now I have this 20 millimeter rusty round bar here, and I'll turn that down to 18 millimeters, and that'll be the shaft to go through the center. For the block here, I'm going to use this piece of home cast aluminium, and I'll cut this down the center where the line is, and that will be machined up and should be all the right size. Now the ends will be held on by these countersunk screws up through the bottom here. I start with the piece of steel that we're going to use for the end plates, and I true up the edges. Then I cut that piece in half so that we have two ends. I've clamped it together, and then I'm spot welding these two pieces together. That's so I can make two identical parts that are exactly the same. I drill out the two mounting holes in each part. Then those mounting holes are tapped out for a M8 bolt. Test the bolt, and that works great. Now I need to make a 18 millimeter hole for the rod to go through, and I use drill bits all the way up to 17.5 mil, and then I ream the rest of that out. The part is now stood vertically up and down, and I'm drilling out some holes for some grub screws. Those grub screws will be locking down on the bar that goes through the center. That's the piece pretty much done, and I've made some witness marks here so that I can orientate these pieces in the same way for the bar to go through the middle. Now I need to separate them, and hopefully I've ground enough off that they will just pop apart. There you go. I start working on the aluminium hinge part, and I cut through almost all the way and finish it off with a few taps of the hammer. That aluminium block is milled down and trued up so that it's all square. That's the block all finished. I need to drill and tap two holes down here for the router to go onto, and then bore out a hole for the shaft to go through the middle. I first need to take the top piece of the router jig off so I can measure it up. I start by drilling the hole patterns for the threads so the router can be mounted on this block. A bit of CRC lubricant and those threads are tapped out. Then I drill out the hole for the shaft to go through. I work my way up through different drill sizes. Then I remount for the final size. This is a piece of 20mm rusty bar and I cut a piece off for the shaft. I put that in the lathe and that's cleaned up and turned down to the right dimension. I test out the block on the shaft and this is a great fit. I'm milling 2 flat spots, one on each end of the shaft. This is for the grub screws on those 2 end blocks. The metal working part is done, so now I'm working on the baseboard. I could have used a skill saw here, but hey, what's the fun in that? Straighten the edges out a little bit with the belt grinder. Now I'm marking out where I need to drill the holes. And I find the center here. Then punch those holes with an automatic center punch. Off to the drill press and those holes are drilled out. I need some protection on these parts as they could go rusty, so I'm using some perma-blue. And all the parts are put in the perma-blue, they're washed off thoroughly and then they're oiled up. And they came out pretty good. This is how it all fits together. Then it screws onto the board with some countersunk screws. It works great. I made a little block up that goes under the pivot, and that's so the router doesn't fall over. And this is how it works. Can slide along the bar, left and right. And at the back, left and right. This is a bowl I turned. And I use this 5.5mm parting blade to cut these grooves in the back of the bowl. Now I'll flip the bowl over and I'll work on the front, and that's where we use the router jig. I have a 6mm flat router bit in the machine. I cut these slots and then advance the indexing around to the next position and then cut the slots again. Here's a view from the back. This takes a little while. There's 51 slots to cut here. We get to the last slot, and as you can see, I'm cutting about 3 or 4 times, and I'm just increasing the depth each time. Now I've turned the center of the bowl out and I've put a finish on here, and that's all complete, and that's coming out really, really good. Here's a close-up of the flutes that I've cut. And you can see they're narrow at the beginning and they're wider at the end, and that's because the diameter gets larger. I've also done a second bowl. The hinge base worked really, really well, and these bowls came out really nice. I'm happy with those results. I hope everyone has a great day, and once again, thanks for watching.